right, here we go. Um, I simply just brought up one of the news articles. Now they're saying that oh, the CIA warned the Germans weeks in advance. Well, that doesn't that doesn't absolve the United States because we very well could have planted the bombs well ahead of time and waited for the Russians to get near and then blow it up. The Russians have the capability to do this. The United States has the capability of doing this. And honestly, God, if the Ukrainians, with the amount of money and equipment and shit, they could get it done if they really wanted to get it done. But let's talk about this because there's a lot of people who want to say definitively one side did it or one side didn't do it, right? The White House would love, and the Spanish and the people who are pro-NATO would love to say it's the Russians, and people who are skeptical or people who are totally black-pilled, or I should say, have been reading the headlines and watching one conspiracy theory after another come true. They are pretty sure the U.S. did it secretly, but it's not so simple. So let's talk about the parties. Lost benefit. Let's start with Germany. All right. You may think, how does Germany benefit from this pipeline getting destroyed? Well, Germany does not, but Germans, and this is in some Germans, may. There were plenty of internal resistance in Germany to the pipelines connecting to Nord Stream 1, Nord Stream 2, connecting them, basically German energy to the Russians. And in fact, they're paying the price for that right now, and they will be this winter particularly hard, because it was a stupid idea and they shouldn't have done it in the first place, considering, Russia's belligerent. And by blowing this up, what this does is this forces Germany to take a completely different route. Not let's end the fight and and sell out the Ukrainians and do whatever it is. We have to now secure our own energy. We have to now alliance ourselves with people who are actual reliable allies like the United States, Britain, other parts of Europe, not the Russians. So if you are a German nationalist, you could very easily argue that, hey, you know what? Good thing this was destroyed, because now we have absolutely no excuse to not be domestically handling our own energy and not being basically at the teat of the Russians. So that said, what does Germany lose? Well, what they lose is, well, they already are in an energy crisis situation because of the said energy policy and because of the war with Russia. But now they're really screwed because the bargaining chip the Russians had to basically say, hey, we can give you lots of cheap energy if you help us negotiate a piece of Ukraine away, has now been taken off the table. And the Germans will suffer for this. And I'm sure some will get sick and maybe some will die this winter because of lack of fuel. And, it is a stab right to the German middle class and lower class because they're the ones who can't afford to heat their homes. They're the ones who can't afford to drive to work. And, it completely screws Germany over. Like, the fact that Germany doesn't get now, basically a negotiation piece that they had with an adversary, but nonetheless, a negotiation piece they had with another sovereign country has now been taken away from them. And that was why they were saying, oh, this is an act of war against, and they were saying it invokes the NATO Charter and whatnot. I don't know if it goes that far, but I understand why they're saying that. They're pretty pissed off. And ultimately, in terms of who are the real victims of all this, it's going to be the German people, whether secretly the Germans did this to themselves or not. The German people are victims in this. They're victims of their own policy as well. But now it's double whammy because, well, the bad decision they made has now actually been taken away as well. So that's the German situation. Do I think it was the Germans secretly doing it to themselves? No, I don't. But it's not out of the realm of possibility. It is possible. Second, United States. Well, the U.S. Under the Trump administration said, Germany, what are you doing? Do not make these energy deals with Russia. It is going to make you dependent on them, and then Russia's going to get bold and start doing shit. And what happened? They made the deals with Russia. They became dependent on them, and then Russia started shit. It's almost like the Trump actually knew what he was talking about when it came to foreign policy, and people like me who actually said, yeah, don't do that, Germany. That sounds like a really bad idea. Just like the U.S. Shipping electronics manufacturing over to China. Yeah, we probably shouldn't do that because they don't like us. And we're finally now going, oh, we should probably bring that back. It's the same thing but energy. It's even more immediate, because that's like they cut off computer chips from us. That sucked for a little while, and then we can build some more. They cut off oil from you when you don't have oil, like you're Germany, not the United States. You're in big trouble because you were dependent. You were speculating essentially on being able to spend a certain amount of energy over a certain amount of time for a certain price, and now that's just been completely taken away from you. Or I should say, you're at the mercy of a hostile power. So the United States, we were not happy with that deal until the Biden administration took over. When the Biden administration took over, not unlike the reset/overcharge button with the Obama administration, it was whatever. Let them do their pipeline stuff because we're canceling our pipelines and it'll drive the cost of oil up and blah blah blah, environmental, like just nonsense, right? And they just weren't thinking in terms of they think in terms of, I should say, well, if there's more economic tying in things that are super dependent between Germany and Russia, like the Russians want the German money and the Germans want the Russian oil, well then they're less likely to act up. And it's like they look at the oil as leverage, which anybody with a half a brain did look at it as leverage. So it occurred. Now, when the invasion started, one of the first things the U.S. said and Biden said was, well, that pipeline's got to go now. Can't be making those deals with Russia, like, wagging the finger. Because they thought that, they treated it like, oh, the threat of removing the pipeline was a bigger threat against Russia because Russia wanted the money. And we'll make sure it gets shut down. And the Germans then turned around and said, well, okay, so the new one is shut down indefinitely, probably forever. But the old one, maybe we don't want to break the status quo. And the U.S. said, no, you got to get away from that. I should say, the Biden administration said that. And the Germans were thinking, no, but we are funding the Russians. We're not sure. There's a lot of turmoil. So then the idea would be basically, the U.S. just says, oh, sorry, you lost your pipeline. Sucks for you. Could we have done that? Yeah, we could have. Do I think it's outside the moral scope of the people in charge to do something like that? No, of course not. I think they're pretty evil already as it is. And, blowing up a pipeline to achieve a political ends is probably on the low end of things that they would do to keep their political power or enforce a policy. I mean, we've seen what they've been doing. The U.S., however, we don't benefit from it as much as really as much as we would in an event where we had a blossoming oil economy, right? We had basically like under the Trump administration. If we had the Keystone XL, if we were actually a net energy exporter, blowing up a competitor's export to an ally of ours, that would benefit us a lot. But right now, we don't have the capacity to put it out. And instead, all it is basically forcing Germany to commit to the fight in the Ukraine. So, if we are the ones who did it, we're stupid. We're stupid for having done it, and we're wrong for having done it, and we're stupid for not having essentially the backup plan, which is essentially U.S. oil exports, which we don't have anymore. We're now begging the OPEC and the Venezuelans. When we have plenty of oil at home, they just won't let us drill it. Which is insane. That a government would be powerful enough to tell you that, like, oh yeah, you can't extract resources. I know it's your land. I know you have leases. But we're just going to say, oh, this is our whatever, and now you can't do. It's crazy. So, beside that point, how does the U.S. benefit? They benefit. We benefit geopolitically in terms of shoring up an alliance against the Russians. It does get NATO's panties in a bunch. We saw how pissed off the Spanish were, and understandable. Some of these European countries I kind of want to laugh at because they won't pay for their own defense, and then now that basically Russian oil has been cut off, they're like all pissed off, and it's like, well, you know, what do you look? You want us to go to war for you? Right? You know, you're supposed to be paying part of NATO. You guys aren't. Most of you aren't even doing that. So it's on us to go to war on their behalf. So, you know, in terms of corruption, does it hurt the basically? If the U.S. did it, the parties in the U.S. did it to benefit themselves, not to benefit the United States of America. And that's not unlike what I was saying with Germany. Ukraine. Now, the Ukraine, they absolutely benefit from this. They absolutely benefit from this because it takes the bargaining chip the Russians had with the Germans completely off the table. And the Germans now have no choice but to take an anti-Russian position and seek fuel elsewhere. The Russians can't say, oh, you don't want to freeze this winter? You know, you could lay up and let us have a piece of Ukraine, and then we can pump the oil and all be smiles. The Ukrainians are like, yeah, we don't want the Germans to suddenly get in bed with the Russians over oil. So if this pipeline goes, that would be very beneficial. Fair enough. And right now, the Ukraine is at war with Russia. So, is that are they attacking the German pipeline? Is that some like a illegal attack? Maybe, but it also was half Russian owned. So I kind of give the Ukraine a pass. If they did it, they're at war right now. So, you know, what do you expect, right? Protect your damn pipeline. They obviously didn't do that very well. The next people who could have possibly done it was the Russians themselves. The Russians, by this happening, if you notice what happened with oil prices, especially with the coordination with OPEC saying, yeah, we're going to actually cut production, oil prices skyrocketed. So the Russians are going to make a fortune off of this energy disruption. And now they also have a way to say, hey, look, NATO's attacking itself, and look how bad the Germans hated us so much that now the pipeline's destroyed, and oh, America, like there's a lot of political capital they gain from the destruction of the pipeline, particularly at home, because then it looks like, oh, Russia's being attacked from all angles. So Russia can benefit in that way. The way Russia doesn't benefit is that if you argue that the geopolitical situation has not improved for Russia, and it puts Germany more in the camp of NATO. And it basically takes Russian leverage over Germany out of the equation. Now, someone could argue, as a Russian, really, what is the value of Germany compared to the value of the propaganda victory or whatever it is they get, or the prices going up, skyrocketing for oil to Russia compared to the value of Germany being more dedicated to NATO than they already are? So, fair enough. But, I'm torn. My first instinct when I saw this happening, I said, it seems like something the Russians probably did. The more I've looked into it, the more I'm not so sure. I would say they are the most likely candidate, but that's like, if it's any other party, I'm not going to be surprised. But then there's another candidate who nobody's talking about, who they should be talking about. China. China benefits significantly from the destruction of this pipeline. Because what it does is it forces the West and Russia further apart from each other, which forces Russia to no longer be able to sell their oil to anybody else but the Chinese and Chinese associated allies. It shores up the oil market from Russia to China, as opposed to Europe being able to say, hey, we've got a lot more money than the Chinese, and we'll buy peace, and we'll buy oil. And then the Russians get money from both sides. The Chinese have now an investment in Russia, and they have a reason to keep Russia in their pocket. This pipeline was in the way of that in a lot of ways. China is kind of the sleeper here that nobody's paying attention to. They're making a shitload of money. And they're leeching it from Russia. But they're also leeching it from the West because they still do business with the West pretty openly. They benefit very well. And right now, China is Russia's access to the rest of the world. And by Russia being isolated even further by destruction of a pipeline like this, it makes them that much more dependent on China. So the argument against China being, I should say, China, why China wouldn't want something like this or wouldn't do something like this, is because there's always a risk of getting caught. But mainly it's because the price of oil goes up significantly. China, they do have to buy that oil. They may be looking at it as a long term because they have an exclusive market with Russia. They are getting it cheaper than everybody else. But it does also hurt all their Western buyers because the prices go up for the Western buyers, which potentially means that the Western buyers can be spending less money with China because they have less money because they're spending it on fuel. Of course, communists were never really good at economics, so they may not be looking at it like that. But that's what we're looking at. That's what we're looking at. And it's kind of scary. A lot of people thought this was the, Franz Ferdinand moment. It's not. If we roll into essentially what is World War III, it's going to be a lot more like the way World War II began, where people forget in 1936 the Japanese invaded China. Well before the Germans started their, not well before, but before the Germans started their expeditions. The Germans annexed territory. The Russians worked with the Germans to invade Poland. Lots of shit happened before, Dunkirk, before Pearl Harbor, before, it really became a world war. But it's a slow burn. So if we get into a grander conflict, this is just a footnote. This is just a footnote. Everybody's looking for the thing that's the signal. That's not how it works. That's not how it's going to work. There's not going to be a Franz Ferdinand moment. It's just going to be a slow burn until something snaps and it's just stuff gets pushed over the line. China tries to take Taiwan and Taiwan fights them off, and it ends up being a shit show, and there's violence and death, and U.S. gets involved, and navies sinking each other. I mean, will there be a Pearl Harbor moment? Possibly, but it's not going to be from something like this. It's not going to be this wishy-washy, politically nuanced. Oh no, a pipeline was destroyed. Did anybody die? No. Is it sensational? Is it something that is going to shock the rest of the world? You see the battleships burning and the bodies of the soldiers of Pearl Harbor. That starts a war. You see, the marching on Paris by the Nazis. That's the kind of shit that starts wars. I should say starts the world wars where everybody gets involved, not just the immediate stakeholders. This pipeline popping, people are going to say all kinds of stuff about it, but it's really not. I should say it doesn't make the situation in Europe right now any that much worse than what it already is. I'm honestly more concerned about the use of tactical nuclear weapons by the Russians in a desperate bid than I am about, oh no, pipeline fights. Because before Sweden entered NATO, they stopped the Russians from cutting fiber optic lines underwater. That was a story really early on in the war. They were cutting fiber optic lines between Sweden and Finland and the mainland of Europe in an effort to essentially stop intelligence coordination. And the Russians got busted doing that. And did that turn into oh my god, that's an act of war. That's as much of an act of war as the destruction of this pipeline is by whatever party's responsible. But it didn't, calm down. Everybody calm down. Twitter does not give good analysis. And again, people I like Elon Musk, he's like, if we give Russia these pieces, that's a better option than nuclear war. Yeah, okay, but this position you put yourself in after that is not a better option than saying, like, hey, like let's solve this on a small scale and fight for this. Then the precedent you have now of all you got to do is threaten nuclear weapons, and then you get a piece of territory. Like, that's awful. It's like, what's going to just stop everybody from doing that? How's that fair to the Ukrainians, right? I thought we had some, policies where you don't threaten a non-nuclear state with nuclear weapons, because that's insane. Especially if especially if you're the one who attacked them, So, it's all right. We'll figure this out. I think the conflict is starting to come to a close. It's going to get bad before it gets worse. I'm not saying that the violence in the region has come to a close, because it has not. But I think Russia doesn't have anywhere else to take this except firing a tactical nuclear weapon. And I don't think Putin has the clout to do that. Because if he does that, he's done. Even if he somehow got domestic support, he's done. He can't enter a world market. The paradigm shifts. And in terms of the ability to deliver tactical nuclear weapons, China is well behind the West. I'm sorry, China too, but Russia is well behind the West. Russia's got the big ones. They have plenty of ICBM kind of stuff. God knows if that stuff's still working, because with how their Russian maintenance has proven to be. But they've already played enough games with the West and lost that this bluff here I don't suspect to be any different. And if they do fire it, it's not Armageddon. It's just really bad day for the Russians and whoever gets hit by the tactical nuke. That's what it is. I'm more concerned about how the powers that be take advantage of it. That's it. Go out and buy yourself some iodine, because there is the chance of thermonuclear war is never zero. Go to sleep thinking that. Well, I just don't do that. My point of saying that is that, yeah, that's true, but there's nothing you can do about it. You can't tweet about it. You can't put a hashtag. Can't put a flag in your profile. Can't scream at people about Trump or some shit. That's not going to help the situation. It's you're along for the ride, and the people with the money and the weapons are the ones who are going to be are driving the car. So just be prepared and don't overreact, because the fear is what they use to control you. If there's anything we should have learned over the last 2.5, 3 years, especially after COVID, the fear is what they use to control you. Not the logic, not the facts, not actual violence, but the fear. The fear of whatever. Whether it's the disease, or it's nukes, or it's the climate, it's the fear. You make people afraid, they start acting in a way that's a little more predictable, and if you make them afraid of something, then you can push people in the other direction. You can push people into all kinds of directions if you want them. If you present a remedy to their. You notice it's never here. Take this, do this, get this vaccine, and then you don't have to be afraid. It's you are afraid, and everyone should be afraid. And you should also do this, because that's the responsible thing to do. But it's because it's so scary. And then once you've complied, they either have another thing for you to be afraid of, or they still want you to be afraid. They still want you to wear the mask when you're driving alone. It's insane. But stay strong, see through it, and when you hear these pundits and these people talk about things, know half of them are idiots. When you see somebody like Zelensky talk about something, know where he stands. Know he will say anything to get weapons and money into the Ukraine to fight the war. And when I say anything, it means he will lie. He will say stuff that doesn't make any sense. He will say stuff that sounds wild and crazy. But it's not for you. It's not for you. It's for the people who can give him the money and the arms. And likewise, when you hear the president say something, he's saying something because he thinks he's doing statesmanship, and that's assuming he remembers where he is. But the stage is largely not for you. I don't think there's anybody out there who actually wants to see nukes get used. I could be wrong. I mean, Vindman, who the hell knows, right? He's a nutcase. But, stay strong. And, don't be afraid. And, don't partner up with the Russians, because this is the kind of crap that happens.